Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulil Kareem. Now, you remember where we left off this morning? We were just getting into the question about suffering in the world, the presence of evil. How do we explain that? Well, Brother Dawood got us started by saying that evil is actually the absence of good. So this way of looking at it goes back to Aristotle, who spoke of privation. So he said that something is actually deprived of something. It's not that something bad has been put into it. So in that way of looking at evil, that's one answer to the question, that when we look at something that people call evil, it is actually something that lacks the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah creates good, but on the other hand there is something that lacks that good, so that we describe as evil. That's one way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it is that there may be something that is called necessary evil. I have to keep this open, yes. Necessary evil. In other words, there may be some things which are there not because they're desirable in and of themselves, but because they will contribute to some other greater good. And it is, in that case, you can say in a way excusable. Now, Keith Ward, whose name I mentioned before, has dealt with this question about the presence of evil in the world, and what he has said actually comes close to what some Muslim scholars have said in the past. They have said, and he is now saying, that if there is a certain good to be achieved, then God, because He is good, will achieve that good. And if there is a good that will be achievable only with the presence of some evil that accompanies it as a sort of a byproduct, then God will achieve that good as well, because there is so much more good that will now result that would not otherwise have resulted. And in our specific case, if there is a world to be created, and here philosophers use the term world not meaning our world, our earth, but they mean the universe as a whole, but they use the term world. If there is a world to be created, a possible world, or let's say universe, that's our current term, if there's a universe to be created that will involve a great amount of good and also some evil, then according to philosophers, the good God would want to create that universe as well. So the presence of some evil in that would not thwart the whole plan and make that amount of good now unachievable. So what they say is that there are some things which are just simply logically impossible, and if something is logically impossible, it is logically impossible also for God. When we think simplistically of God being able to do everything, we think everything. But philosophers say that no, there are some things which are logically impossible. The Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides, in his book Guide to the Perplexed, said that God cannot create a square whose diameter, what do you say, not diameter, but diagonal? The cross between diagonal. God cannot create a square whose diagonal will be equal to one of its sides, because that is a logical impossibility. Now, there may be ways of conceiving shapes and planes that may actually render this as a bad example. But the point remains that if something is actually logically impossible, then there's no sense of saying that God can do that or God will do that, because then you're speaking in a way you're speaking nonsense. And the Christian philosopher C.S. Lewis said that if you say something like this and attribute it to God, you are actually speaking nonsense. And to say that God cannot do something is not the same as saying that God is unable, or or that there is something blocking him or something stopping his power from achieving something. He said if you're speaking nonsense, then even if you attribute it to God, you're still speaking nonsense. There's no sense in saying about something impossible that God can do that thing. It's not like the army advertisement that said the possible we do right away, the impossible takes us a little bit longer. The idea is that if something is logically impossible, then it's logically impossible for God as well. Now, how that relates to our point here is that if something is to be achievable, that is basically good but will entail some evil byproduct along with it, if the overall result is something that is good, and this is for God to judge, then God will bring that into existence as well, even with the evil that is accompanying it. So our scholars have said that there is nothing that is absolutely evil. What we are describing as evil may be there because it is a necessary evil. And in the sense of our universe then, there will be some aspects of it which are undesirable from our point of view, but nevertheless they are somehow contributing to the whole. Now, we spoke earlier about human beings having free will, and this is covered extensively in your notes. I don't want to repeat that. But one aspect of evil comes from human beings exercising free will. And not only human beings, but other creatures as well, such as the jinn kind, who exercise free will. Now, if God is to give human beings free will to choose what they're going to do, whether to obey Him or disobey, whether to do good or to do evil, that means that there has to be something which is called evil. Otherwise there'll be nothing of it to choose. The possibility of it has to be there. To put it a different way, if God wants human beings to automatically obey Him, well, that will be creating human beings similar to angels who automatically obey God. But if there is a level of obedience which is higher than automatic obedience, it is that deliberate obedience. And deliberate obedience means that one has to consciously decide to obey when there is another real alternative, meaning to disobey. That means the alternative to disobey has to be available and it has to be real. So if the real opportunity is there to disobey, that means to do evil. So naturally, evil will result from the very act of creating human beings or creatures like human beings who will have the free will to obey or disobey. Now, if some evils will result from that, perhaps there is more in the system that requires that or will contribute to that. In other words, we spoke earlier about the possibility of biological evolution and the inheritance of certain characteristics. Now, if the entire universe is created such that everything will develop in a programmed manner, then human beings will develop out of the same program. But if there is a certain degree of spontaneity or randomness within the creation itself, if God fixes that into the system so that the whole system works in a combination of chance and necessity. We're using two terms which I used this morning, but now in different senses. Remember, those words were from the title of Keith Ward's book, God, Chance, and Necessity. And there the point was that either the universe had to necessarily exist, or it exists by chance, or that God created it. So we used the word chance and we used the word necessity there, but now I'm using it in a different sense. In the sense that the universe must necessarily have some features, or it must necessarily reach certain points in its development, or it must reach a certain or it must have certain elements at a certain point in time, let's say. So these are necessary elements programmed into the universe. And then there can be random elements also programmed into the universe. And so that even though the universe has to reach certain points and has to assume a certain basic shape at a certain time, it can at the same time have certain flexible or random occurrences about it. Now I know that sounds very theoretical. Let me see if I can put it in a more concrete and down-to-earth fashion. Let us say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fixes for a human being, now I'm bringing it down to our level, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fixes for a human being that he will have $1 million or she will have $1 million. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves it flexible whether the person will achieve that $1 million through honest means or dishonest means. So now he will have the same $1 million regardless of the means that he chooses, but he will be responsible, of course, for the means that he chose. So you have the fixed element. This is how much he will get, $1 million. That's the necessary outcome. That must happen. And then you have the flexible options, either through the halal means or the haram means. And whichever of the flexible option is chosen, the result is going to be the same, and you're not going to be charged for the result, but you're going to be questioned about the option which you chose. In a similar, so we have here now we have an outcome which is there as a result of chance and necessity. So you have a fixed outcome that is achievable through flexible means. In a similar way, you can have the universe that is in fact constructed as a combination of chance and necessity. Chance here does not mean that things are running out of control, but chance here means that there are flexible options. It can go this way or go that way, but either way it will end up where God wants it. Is that clear? Yeah? Not quite clear? Yes?
I just want to ask a question. You're saying about the £1 million.
Yes.
Supposing someone now has a choice whether to gamble their £10 and obtain the £1 million, or to keep the £10 and obtain nothing. Where does the £1 million come from? You know, that's the logical question that follows.
Yeah, I'm
not doing anything other than either gambling or doing nothing.
Yeah, you see, the question now is actually, you started out where I started, but you have actually departed from that. We're saying if we assume that Allah has fixed for a person that he will get £1 million. Now that's the assumption, that's the premises, right? You don't never go back on your premises unless you're starting a new argument. Okay? So if Allah has fixed for a person to have £1 million, either through a halal means or a haram means, okay, and we're assuming here two options, and just to make it very specific and simplified, so there are two options. Either he gets it through this route or he gets it through that route. Either he, let's say, earns it through a decent job, or he gets it through a bank robbery, let's say. Alright, so there's just two options, just to keep it simple. That's the one fixed result. And I'm keeping this very simple. Otherwise, the result could be very complex. It could be that if he goes this route, he will get $1 million. If he goes this route, he will get $2 million. Okay, but we're keeping it simple. So, the same one fixed result can be achieved through two different means. So you have a necessary result and you have the two flexible options. So I'm saying in a similar way, you can have the universe as a whole constructed such that there is a fixed outcome, many fixed outcomes, and for each fixed outcome there are many flexible paths to take it there. Which would mean then that if the universe is constructed like that, then the universe doesn't run out of control, and at the same time there is a certain randomness that is built into the mechanism of creation. And that very randomness may be the very thing that assures the result that there will be human beings like us and other creatures who will not be programmed in such a fixed way. There will be a certain, in some sense we will be programmed, but in some sense we will also have that flexibility built into our system. And that very randomness itself in the universe as a whole will give rise to certain undesirable outcomes. If we think about the person then earning the $1 million or getting the $1 million either through a halal means or haram means, the haram means is something that is not desirable, but it has to be available as part of the system. In a similar way, some of the randomness that is built into the universe will entail things which are not desirable, to either to us or to Allah or to both, but it is part of the system. So in other words here, you will have a certain amount of evil that is there in the system as well. In short, what we have been saying so far in answer to the question of the atheists is that even though God exists, and even though He knows everything, and even though He is able to remove the evil and suffering if He wants, and even though He's merciful and kind and He wants to help human beings and He wants to remove the evil and suffering, there may be good reasons why the suffering still remains. And the presence of this suffering does not mean that God does not exist, so long as we can be assured that even though God exists, He may have good reasons for permitting such sufferings. You have a point to add to this?
Just very quickly, you said before that there needs to be some kind of necessary evil to contribute to the greater good. What kind of, can you give me an example of what kind of necessary evil is needed to form a greater good? Like a practical example that in case someone asks me what kind of evil do you think of?
Yes. So the question is here, can I give an example of a necessary evil that contributes to a greater good? Well, the one underlying reason we have described so far is one that is good to focus on. The idea that God gives human beings free will. And this is discussed in your notes. You see, such free will conceptually is not realizable without the real possibility of a person doing evil. And if it is possible that people will do evil, then out of millions of creatures, some of them will do evil. So some evil will result. But that's a necessary step, or it has to be accepted such, in order to achieve creatures who will deliberately obey Allah. Otherwise you'll have automatic obedience, in which case everyone just simply obeys and no one can disobey. That's one aspect of it, yes. In order to create creatures who will freely and deliberately worship God, God has to put up with creatures who will freely and deliberately not worship Him, or even worship the devil. So this is a great realizable good that would not have been realizable if God says, no, I don't want the evil. Just create everyone so that everyone is perfect, everyone just simply obeys me, and there's nothing to worry about. But of course you already had that with the angels. So that is one sort of response to that. Now we can add to that by looking at some of the things that people may describe as evil, and see that, as the saying goes, behind every dark cloud there is a silver lining. Even some of the things that people describe as evil, in fact, have some good behind them. Okay, let's say that there is a suffering. Let's say there is a tsunami. Alright, tsunamis, of course, are horrible. We have seen the devastating results from the recent ones. But then at the same time, geologists have assured us, and in fact in the Toronto Star not too long ago there was an article that called together the opinions of geologists placed in many of the leading universities in North America, who concur on the idea that the earth actually goes through some kind of recycling, where the top soil is actually brought down into the bowels of the earth, and that actually is recycled through volcanoes, and all of the processes working together, tsunamis and volcanoes, earthquakes, all of these, plate tectonics, all of these work together to actually replenish the fertility of the topsoil. And if this had not been a process in place and continuing, then of course we would not benefit from the earth's fertility and the vegetation that comes out of it. So they're couching their words, and they're saying it very hesitatingly, because they want to make sure that the words would not indicate that they're callous to the sufferings of people. They don't want to say, okay, we're saying that tsunamis are a good thing in the face of all of the suffering that we have just seen, but nevertheless it is a good thing. Okay, that's what they're saying. From the point of view of geology, it is a good thing. From the point of view of human suffering, obviously nobody wants that. but this now is a necessary part of the way in which the earth continues to sustain human life. And in fact, they even put it more firmly and said that if the earth was not going through this kind of recycling, then life would not have emerged on earth to begin with in the first place. The earth would not have been a place that would have been habitable to begin with. So we may look at it and say it's a bad thing, and definitely we feel and we hurt with the people who are suffering, but there is some good in it, and we can see now why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might permit such a thing even with all of the suffering. Now, so people suffer in something like a tsunami, and then what happens? So that's the bad side of it, right? There's a lot of suffering. Now what's the other side of it? A lot of people had money in the bank but were not giving charity, but now suddenly there's an outpouring of charity. Okay, now that's a good thing, and that is pleasing to Allah, and at the same time it is pleasing to people. People see the goodness of human beings coming out, and it is a purification for individuals who loved wealth, which from our perspective is a bad thing, now are parting with that wealth. Now, people didn't care about people so much. People get busy in modern industrialized countries. People, it's me and my cell phone. It's just, locked away from the world. Where somebody's connected to his earplugs, listening to his whatever CD player. Everyone is in his individualized world. But now suddenly people are connecting more. There's a disaster and people are phoning each other to find out, how are you? What's happening? Are you hurt? People now start caring for human beings much more than they have just say the day before, where they were just simply preoccupied with things, with accumulations, with the material aspects of life in the world. So now suddenly this is a great good that now is achieved. Perhaps it is a bad thing that it had to happen this way, that people had to be taught by a whip to think about the things which are really worthwhile in life, to come back to their senses. But if that's how it has to be achieved, well then, in a way, we might have forced the hand of God to bring it about this way, whereas in fact we could have listened to His message, we could have imbibed that message and lived it without needing this kind of lesson to wake us up. So a lot of great good come out of that one might not have expected. Now we've seen that as people who are involved in ways of life which are not so desirable, suddenly they start to hold benefit concerts. They too become involved in the whole process of charity and caring for human beings. Sister, you have a question? I'm not hearing everything you said. I heard you say that it's mentioned in the Quran that God punishes people, and then? Well, in fact, I haven't heard anyone put forward the objection in this way from an educated perspective. If anyone says that, this might be a lay person who says that, but this is a very weak sort of argument. Usually, the argument that comes from academics is to say God is merciful to people, so He wouldn't want them to suffer. He is all-knowing, so he would know the suffering is there. He's all-powerful, and he would be able to remove, therefore, the suffering which he knows about and which he wants to remove. Now, there is suffering, which means then that either God is not merciful enough, he doesn't want to remove the suffering, or he is not knowledgeable enough, he doesn't know the suffering is there, or he's not capable enough, he's not able to remove the suffering. That's why the suffering remains. And this, in fact, even putting it in this way, in the first place, to just get our bearings straight, this doesn't prove that God does not exist, even in the way it is put like this. Because it only proves that he doesn't have one of the attributes. Either he doesn't have the mercy, or he doesn't have the knowledge, or he doesn't have the power. And we're saying that it's not even that. We're saying it's just that he may have good reasons for allowing the suffering to be there. Now, we have taken it a step further, and we have considered also the possibility that this may be a kind of wake-up call for human beings. Even if you want to say a punishment. And now you're saying, well, somebody may raise this as an objection and say, well, if God is punishing people, that means he's unjust. But as I said, I haven't heard from any academic circles the objection put in this way, that if God punishes people, that means he's unjust. No, I just haven't heard it put this way. Yeah, I think they just grasping at it just in a rough way. But our scholars have said that if Allah punishes people, he's not unjust, because people belong to him, and he can deal with his creatures in any way that he wants. The Quran says, "La yus'alu amma yaf'alu wa hum yus'alun." He is not to be questioned about what he does, but they are to be questioned. That, of course, does not mean that Allah does questionable things, so that he does questionable things but you cannot question him. It actually means in a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not do anything that is questionable. He does things that are all above board. He sends a messenger, he shows you the right way, and he gives you the real possibility of following the right way. If you choose to go the wrong way, well, then you deserve the punishment. The punishment comes as a natural consequence of your own action. So in that case, there is no sense of Allah punishing people in a vindictive way even. One can say, okay, he's vindictive, but this is not our conception of Allah, that he's vindictive. Although some Muslims misunderstand this, because sometimes we speak very loosely, like somebody says, La'natullah alayh, curse of Allah be upon him. And we become vindictive with the use of this. But if you go to the tafsir, you will see that the tafsirs explain that la'na, asluhu al-bu'd. The la'na in Arabic actually comes from distancing. So if the Quran says that Allah has cursed a person, it means that this person is distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what it really means. And it means that this person, as At-Tabari explains, this person is removed from the mercy and grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, of course, the other side of it is that this person has removed himself or herself from the grace and mercy of Allah. Allah creates everyone on the fitrah, puts them in a way that they can receive His grace, and gives them the guidance to stay there and the option to turn away. So those who turn away, they remove themselves from that grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they merit the outcomes that come as a result of that. So it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala vindictively punishes people. First of all, when He punishes people, He's not unjust, because it's not that He took away from them something that rightly belonged to them. They are His creatures. And secondly, He doesn't punish without a reason. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah said that in the ayah in the Quran in Surah Al-Hijr, which says that Nabbi ibadi, inform my servants, Anni anal ghafurur rahim, that I am forgiving and merciful, wa inna adhabi huwa al-adhabul alim, and that my punishment is a severe punishment. So Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah said that this is the construction here shows that the mercy and the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intrinsic to Him. Like, this is His nature, because inform my servants that I am forgiving and merciful. Ana al-Ghafur rahim. I am forgiving and merciful. That's me. And inform them Anna adhabi huwa al-adhabul alim, that my punishment is a severe punishment. Not that I am a severe punisher. You see this difference. Inform them that I am forgiving and merciful, and inform them that my punishment is a severe punishment. So it's me and my punishment. See, that's the contrast. So it's not that Allah is a severe punisher. The point that is being made here, that Ibn Qayyim stressed, is that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be forgiving and kind, this is in His nature. So that's He. But for Him to punish, that's not in His nature. That is something that comes as the result of people doing wrong. So there's a reason for that is extrinsic to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His forgiving and mercy, that is intrinsic. His punishment, that is due to something that's extrinsic, outside of Him. So, yes, in short then, He's not unjust in punishing people, and second, He's not even vindictive in punishing them. And the Quran says, وَمَا يَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُمْ. What is Allah going to do with the punishment that you receive? I mean, how is He going to benefit from punishing you? That's what Allah is saying. So He's encouraging you to be thankful to Him, to believe, so that of course you can continue to merit His mercy. So I don't think there's any objection there. In short then, even the necessary evil that we are looking at, we can see that sometimes there is some underlying or some accompanying good that is there with it, and I don't see that the atheists really have here any good ground to stand on. To recap very briefly, they will say that the presence of evil means that God does not exist, because God is merciful. He would want to remove the suffering. He is knowledgeable. He would know it is there, and He is powerful, so He would be able to remove it. He didn't remove it. That means they say God does not exist, but they should conclude either He doesn't have the mercy, or He doesn't have the knowledge, or He doesn't have the power. They couldn't even conclude logically, based even on their argument, that God does not exist. So we're right back where we started. Atheists have no proof that God does not exist, but they trick themselves and their listeners into thinking that by mentioning suffering they are proving that God does not exist. Logically, they're not even there. And we're saying that when we analyze it further, they're missing one premise. See, if I'm to put that in logical format, and this is actually one of the logical fallacies that we didn't deliver this morning, but it has to do with a missing premise. Sometimes there is something more to the thing, that there's another option. Sometimes people put you in a false dilemma. They say you have to choose between either this or this. And in fact, there's a third item. So that's called a false dilemma. So like when the President of the United States says you're either with us or with the terrorists, he's creating a false dilemma, because there's a third choice. We could be neither with you nor with the terrorists, because we don't support either state terrorism or individual terrorism. We're just Muslims, peace-loving people. So there is a third option, and you don't have to be caught on the horns of the dilemma like that. So in this case, the atheists are saying that either, that God is merciful, He has the knowledge, and He has the power. Therefore, there will be no suffering. But they say, but there is suffering. Here they're using modus. They're using modus tollens. They're using modus tollens, but it's in a more complex form. They're saying if M and K and P are all present, then there will be no suffering. Right? But there is suffering. They're negating that. So it's minus S. But there is suffering. Therefore, what they should be concluding is that it cannot be the case that these all come together. It cannot be the case that mercy and knowledge and power are all attributed to God at the same time. But you can see that's not what they're trying to conclude. They're trying to say, no, God does not exist. So they're concluding something which is not even in the premises. And in a logical deduction, you cannot conclude something which is not in the premises. They've introduced something new by saying God does not exist. This argument can in no way prove logically that God does not exist. So they have tricked themselves, and sometimes they have tricked us too, because it seems like, the evil and suffering is so terrible that emotionally it drains us to think about it, and we cannot really see the clear light of day here. Now, so they're saying that it cannot be that any of this, but we can introduce another premise up here, and we can say that God may have good reasons for allowing. And if I try to write that in using formulae, then it'll become very complicated. But basically we can introduce a new premise and say that it may be the case that God has mercy and knowledge and power to remove suffering unless he has good reasons. So in other words, there'll be no suffering unless good reasons for suffering. Unless there are good reasons for it, right? For that suffering. So then, if we see that there is suffering, right, we can conclude it's either this, or this. That there are good reasons for suffering. And we have seen that there are good reasons for suffering. Therefore we should conclude that God still has the mercy, He still has the knowledge, and He still has the power, but suffering remains because there are good reasons for suffering. So we've identified the missing premise. Any questions? Yes, sister. Yes. Now, for a Muslim, this has been very easy to answer. Somebody has a debilitating chronic illness, somebody has some kind of inexplicable suffering. It's not clear that this is a result of their deeds, and we can think even of a child suffering. So this becomes very difficult to answer. But for a Muslim person, this has never been a difficulty, because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, or many hadith regarding this, make it easy. One hadith says that the situation of the Muslim believer is wonderful, because if he is suffering, he is thankful, or if he's suffering, he has patience, and if he gets good, then he is thankful. So in either case, he's actually reaping good for the life hereafter. So once we look at that broad picture, we see that the overall outcome for the person is good and beneficial. So someone loses a child, for example, and that child will intercede for you on the Day of Judgment. So of course, at that time one would feel that this was a good thing that happened, and so on and so forth. Now, what about for non-Muslims? We don't have the same answer extending, but that is only because we have in fact backed ourselves into a corner of being judges of everyone. So now it comes back to us. So we are being judged. But we shouldn't pretend to be judges of everyone. We should say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to everyone in general. Those who turn away from His mercy are those who have actually rejected His message. And rejection, as noted in your notes, mean that they had to know what it is that they were rejecting. Otherwise, rejection is not registered against them. That's the best that we can tell. Shah Waliullah of Delhi is, of course, a well-renowned scholar internationally from 18th century India. And he has written a book entitled Al-Budur al-Bazigha, the Rising Moons. And in that book, he contemplates a number of issues, including the question of who will be in Al-Araf. Al-Araf, as you know, is a place which is neither Jannah nor Jahannam, and it's not clear exactly what it is. It's just mentioned briefly in the Quran, but apparently there will be people there who are hoping eventually to go to Jannah. لم يدخلوا الجنة وهم يطمعون. They didn't enter Jannah, but they are expecting or hoping. Another place in the Quran mentions the sur lahu bab, a wall that has a door, and scholars think that this is the same, the al-araf, the height. And Surah 7, as you know, is named after the mention of this. Ashabul Araf then are people who somehow are not yet in paradise but are hoping to go there. So who will be the Ashabul Araf? Nothing clear is mentioned about this, and Muslim scholars use the best minds to try and think about who might be there. So they're thinking this is like some kind of intermediary place, neither Jannah nor Jahannam, or maybe connected to Jannah, maybe the wall of Jannah, but not the garden itself. So then, who will be there? So they think, these are some of the suggestions that have been offered in the tafsirs. Someone who went out in jihad but he disobeyed his parents, so he has mixed good with evil here. He has done something good which makes him deserve to enter paradise. At the same time he has disobeyed his parents, which makes him delayed from entering paradise. Alright, so he's a little bit stuck there for the time being. They said that another suggestion is that, of course, we know that those who have the heavy scales with good deeds will have Ishat al-Radiyah, and those man khafat mawazino fa ummuhu hawiya, right? So two different outcomes: heavy scale, light scale. What if the scale is right in the middle smack, even? So they said, okay, he will be an al-Araf. Alright, because it's just in the middle there. So suggestions like this have been given. But of course these are just educated guesses. Now Shah Waliullah Rahmatullah alayh mentioned that, some interesting possibilities, and his possibilities seem to indicate those people who have not yet quite heard the message or couldn't understand it. Like he said, there are people who do not know much about Muslims. All they know is that Muslims wear certain types of clothing and they don't eat certain types of food. So they'll be in al-Araf. Now I'm not saying he's right, I'm just trying to appreciate the breadth of his thinking about this. That there will be people who did not quite understand the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's not really any fault of theirs. It's just that what was presented to them, or what they were capable of knowing, was not the proper message. They just had like some sort of glimpse. He said that there are some people who think that Muslims are here to take away their country, so they will be in al-Araf. Obviously what he means is that those people will have such a mental block, they wouldn't want to know anything about Islam, because of course they have this misunderstanding and misconception. And he said the farmers, probably he was thinking of farmers who were not quite educated and perhaps couldn't respond well to intellectual discussions or concepts, so he said they will be in al-Araf. Now again, I'm not saying he's right about these specific sorts of people, but I'm saying that there are people who would not have heard the message properly or adequately or persuasively, and we are not the ones to judge them. So in the end, we can say, sister, that some of these promises which are made for believers under suffering might very well extend to people who have not actually quite heard the message yet, and perhaps the same message or the same answer can be given regarding their suffering. Maybe in response to their suffering, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them something far better in the life hereafter, and what appears to be suffering now on the broad canvas of the entire creation is not really that bad. And if I mention that analogy, then if we look at the entire canvas from here to eternity, we might actually be looking at one spot there. And if somebody zooms in with a magnifier glass, he will say, "Oh, look at that! That's the evil right there." And that's all he sees, because that's all he's focusing on. But if he takes a step back and looks at the big picture, he might not even see that dot, because the entire big picture with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is from here to eternity. And I think we have to close, but one last thing.
Final question. What do you say to agnostics?
Agnostics. We didn't cover that yet? Okay. I might have to delay my flight or something. Okay. Agnostics. Now, agnostics, very quickly, you will notice in your notes that there's a definition for atheists and a definition for agnostics. Atheists, according to your notes, are those people who deny that God exists. And agnostics are those who say that they cannot be sure if God exists or God does not exist. Now, to make a small comment on the definition about atheists, some atheists in modern times want to change that definition of themselves, because now it's quite clear that atheists cannot really prove that God does not exist. So if they take it as their position that God does not exist, then of course they feel themselves in some disadvantage. They are now holding a position that is unprovable, whereas in fact they have traditionally been people who said we want to go with proof and evidence and so on. So they want to change it to say that atheists are those who do not subscribe to the idea that there is a God. Of course, that is a definition of a non-theist, such as a Buddhist who does not really subscribe to the idea of God. Some Buddhists have this feature about them. But we'll leave that aside. Agnostics. Agnostics say, well, maybe God exists or maybe He doesn't exist, but we do not have enough knowledge about that, nor is there a way that we can really be satisfied on this question. So we have to suspend judgment on that. Intellectually, this is not a bad position. If we didn't have the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is a reasonable position to take. Okay, we don't know. It looks like some people say God exists, some say He doesn't exist, some give arguments in favor, some seem to have arguments against. It looks like we cannot really be sure. But in the light of all arguments that we have presented here, it looks like agnosticism is not a very good position, because in fact we do have some good arguments showing that God exists. And in fact they're not conclusive arguments as we have shown previously, because conclusive argument would mean everyone should really believe this, and if one doesn't believe it, then he's a fool. But we said earlier this morning that there are people who do not believe God exists, and we know many of them to be intelligent people. They might be even professors that are teaching you in the universities. You don't think that they are fools or idiots. You just think that they lack the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the flip side of that is that they themselves are not choosing the guidance, because if they choose it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the other side will be guiding them along the same path. So there are good reasons for believing that God exists, but the reasons are not such that will knock someone over. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if He wanted, He could reveal such a proof that will cause their necks to bend. Of course, it will be such a proof which will make sure that everyone will subscribe to it, but that's not the kind of proof that He has given. Good arguments, but not ones that leave people without any kind of way out. People have a way out. If somebody says, no, I don't want to believe in God, he can say, okay, look, suffering, okay, my child died young, okay, I've got this chronic illness, whatever. People can have some excuses. So that's our first point about agnosticism, is that it's not actually so well balanced in the middle, because there are good reasons for believing in God. Second, practically, agnosticism doesn't have anything to live out. You see, if one says, I am a believer, then he starts or she starts acting like a believer, praying, fasting, making hajj, giving zakat, or even if a non-Muslim believer, not like a Christian or a Jew or someone, they have certain things that they're doing to show their devotion to the God that they believe in. True? Now, if someone says, I'm an atheist, I believe that God does not exist, then he starts acting like an atheist. He might curse God, or maybe he's not so violent, but he might live as though he is in control. There's no God to rule over him. There are no rules to govern his life. There are no kosher, non-kosher, no halal, no haram. You do what you like. You please yourself so long as you don't hurt anyone else, and so on. You live like an atheist, right? Because you don't believe that God exists. So now, one believes that God exists and lives according to that. Another one believes that God does not exist and lives according to that. Where does the agnostic fit in? How does the agnostic live?
Because agnostics don't actually deny God.
Don't actually deny God. So that means they are working on the possibility that He does exist. It's just that they do not have enough knowledge about Him. But then they are neither serving that God in case He exists, nor what are they doing? They are in fact living like the atheist. So they have actually taken a practical position with the atheist, whereas in fact they need a position of their own. So in fact they are not acting according to their belief that the possibility is real that God does exist. Because if the possibility is real that God does exist, and the agnostic doesn't really know that yet, the agnostic should be trying to find out. and see if maybe there is a way. And now someone may say, well, wait, if God exists, why doesn't he show himself to me? Well, it's not for you to dictate for that God. If there is really a God who created you, it's not for you to dictate how he's going to show himself to you. Perhaps that God will show himself to you in a way that he has shown himself to others. Perhaps the way to come into contact with this God and really to know God is to come and sit humbly in the floor of a masjid and say, God, if you really do exist, then become a reality in my own life. Perhaps this is the humility that is required, and the agnostic has not tried. So we should encourage the agnostic to actually try this. Yes?
That's exactly what I did when I went away from organized religion.
Oh, yeah?
I said I was an atheist, and people said, no, you're not, because you're still looking to see if there is a God. And I continued to look.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
You are an agnostic because you're looking.
May Allah bless you. That's so very nice. And the last thing we can mention about this is that if the agnostic is nowhere of his own in this life, then where is he in the life hereafter? Now, in your notes, you have the argument against the atheist, that if the atheist is correct after all, then he doesn't gain anything. And if the atheist is wrong, then he loses everything. Now, the agnostic, by living like the atheist, is in the same boat. If there is no God, the agnostic doesn't gain or lose, right? He's even Steven. But if there is a God who demanded our worship of him, then the agnostic is cut off from the grace of that God that he refused to serve in this life, even while he knew that there was a real possibility that that God exists, and that there are people who obviously have been serving that God, but he didn't respond to the call and serve that God. So, in short, I can say that the agnostic position initially may appear to be a middle ground intellectual position, and it's an attractive one for many intellectuals, but at the same time it is accompanied by a number of flaws. In the first place, we have seen that there are good arguments to believe in the existence of God, which we have shown here, and perhaps what clinches it for a lot of people is the Quranic revelation itself, and many who claim to be agnostics may actually be leaving Christianity or some other religion, and they have not become familiar with the religion of Islam or the Quranic text as a revelation from Allah. They may have just simply concluded by hasty generalization that they know one book which is corrupt, and maybe the Quran is just like the other books, so no need to check this out. So hasty generalization. We know one book, we know all books. I came to the UK and met one person who was blonde hair and blue-eyed, and I concluded all people in the UK are blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Okay, that's hasty generalization. You cannot conclude about all religions from just simply knowing one, or about all books from just simply knowing one. Unfortunately, many people make that kind of mistake. So they may not have become familiar with the Quranic revelation to know it yet, but if they know it, they might be swayed by the arguments which we have put forward, showing that there are good reasons for believing that God exists. Second, the agnostic is not really living practically as an agnostic, worshipping some of the time and not worshipping some of the time, but he is living like the atheist usually, as if God does not exist. And in terms of outcome, the agnostic may find himself just simply with the atheist, whose life he shared in this world, and that's the life of eternal loss. Yes, sister.
I actually remember a situation where my supervisor, when I was in the church, he said, how do you keep Quran is right? You know that Bible has been corrupted. So Quran is also corrupted.
Yeah.
What is the hand of that?
Well, of course, by pointing to... Yeah, of course, first name it, say this is a hasty generalization. Based on your experience with one book, you have concluded that all books are corrupted. That's not a fair conclusion. You have to get a properly representative sample of the Quran to know if the Quran has been tampered with or not. Can we close at this point then? Alright. Shukran, jazakumullah khairan. Thank you all very much. Sorry if I left anything out. If anything, just let me know between now and tomorrow. Inshallah, we'll try to include it. If not, then we continue on course. Shukran, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.